Hey everybody, it's Jeremy from jeremy.net. I am a comic book artist, writer, creator, self-publisher, and I share my creative process here with you online. If you enjoy these live streams, like to get additional bonus live streams twice a month, like the one that I will be doing tomorrow, you can become a Patreon subscriber for as little as $2 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/Jeremy. It's patreon.com/GERIMI to get a free digital sketchbook, work in progress animated GIFs, blog posts about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what's inspiring me creatively. You can sign up for my free monthly newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you'd like to purchase physical copies of my comic books, or if you read digitally on Kindle, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. That will forward you to my Amazon author page. Pick up my books there. So let's see. I already see Jay King is in the chat. Says, what's good, people? What is good with you? All is well here. And I am doing something not unusual for me, but excuse me, did not have a chance to hit the sneeze, the cough button, even though it was a sneeze before sneezing. I had an idea that just came to me, random idea, and it's not even like, oh, this is a revolutionary idea, I need to bring it to the people. No, I just had an idea for an illustration, and I'm trying to get my ideas more concrete sooner. Like when I get hit with that inspiration, I'm trying to make an effort to follow that inspiration and sketch out the idea, maybe even do a finished illustration closer to the time when I had it. And for some random reason, I woke up this morning with the idea for doing an illustration of a cat as a sexy cowgirl. Don't know where this came from mentally. It just did. And I was like, all right, let's try it. So let me grab some of the reference that I collected. Let's take this over here. So I'm going to start by organizing my reference board. And then once I've got everything laid out the way I want it, I'm going to start sketching out thumbnails for this image. And then once I'm done, I can take that reference sheet of my thumbnails and drop that into a finished illustration, blow that up, or drop it into a large canvas and redraw the finished illustration on top of that. But first things first, I have now a screen full of reference images that I need to organize. So starting really mentally, I think a lot of this is coming from Tom and Jerry, that old cartoon. And it's something sort of along the lines of this character here, except just a tuxedo cat in kind of a sexier pose. Although she is very much drawn as kind of like almost like a Gil Elvgren illustration as a cat, which is, amusing and kind of creepy at the same time. But hell, I'm gonna go with it. I'm going with it. The muse does what the muse does. And the muse is saying, draw this. The muse. All right. So really, I'm just kind of lining these images up along here in a way that I'll have everything that I need. So I've got some cat reference in here. Let's see here. Ha! I see James is in the chat. Says, I'm here now. Good to see you, James. Welcome. I was kind of torn between working on this illustration versus I had a conversation with a good friend of mine about the fact that I have not started on my next comic yet. And he challenged me to get off my ass and move to doing starting a new book. And I have a whole folder full of ideas, and I was talking over some of the ideas with him. And one of them I was prepared to start drawing a cover for today. And I was going back and forth between doing the cover art for that new comic versus doing this illustration this morning. And why I picked one over the other, I cannot tell you. Hmm. I may have too much damn reference. Let's see. Some of these I don't need. I think there's one or two in here where I have more than one image that has what I was looking for. So James asks, "Is that your cat?" No, it is not. Although our cats do look similar in the sense that they're not tuxedo cats, but they are almost like gray tuxedo cats. If you were to take a tuxedo and make them gray instead of black, this is similar to how our cats look. But since I'm intentionally making this a sexy cowgirl, I know it's stupid because it's a cartoon, but I feel weird about drawing my own cats as sexy characters. So I opted not to use our cats for reference, even though we have ample photo reference of them around the house. If I needed some reference, it's there for me to use. But but no, not our cats. James also asks, I'm not sure how familiar you are with Mark Texeira's Wolverine run from the '90s, but I noticed line work on forums, which I'm assuming he did. It seems to me that he did not emphasize that he did that to emphasize volumes. But I'm wondering what you think. I also see Paul in the chat. Great to see you as always, Paul. Thanks for stopping by. What's interesting is, yes, I am familiar with Mark Texeira's Wolverine run from the '90s. I'm having a hard time picturing it only because I think that I'm more familiar with his Ghost Rider run. I think he was on Ghost Rider longer, but I definitely read both books. I'm familiar with both books. Um, as a matter of fact, let's just look at it in real time. Let me pop over here and let's go Mork. Let's grab a page. Let me try and find a page that actually has like sequentials as opposed to just splash pages. I've got a lot of his covers in here. Let's see. Something on Comic Art Fans. So let's see. The line work on the forums, which it seems to me that he did that to emphasize volumes. Well, I feel like that's true of every comic art. Well, no, it's not true of every comic artist. Some people are intentionally doing like flat two-dimensional work. I mean, he's sticking to sort of the traditional concepts of comic book inking and illustration, where you know the lines that are presenting the undersides of volumes are thicker than the ones on the overside. Like if you look at this thigh right here, the underside of that thigh is all dark and heavy, whereas on the top side, you see how as it's moving up the thigh, it gets narrower, and then only when it gets to his hip, which is going backwards in space, does it thicken out again. Um, I mean, I would definitely say that he's doing that. I mean, also going with Sabretooth, same thing, where if you compare the lines on the top versus the lines on the bottom, well, it's not just that the lines are thicker on the underside, but they're also thicker on areas where it looks like the light is turning away, because it seems like these characters are lit from the front. And while you would expect the underside of his shoulder to be darker, if his shoulder is turned towards us because he's leaning forward, so we're looking kind of at the upper parts of his shoulder like he's leaning in, then the parts of his shoulder that are, it's almost like the shoulder is a sphere, and if he's lit from the front, those upper edges of that sphere turning away from us are going to be getting darker. So it's really about him his line work respecting the light logic, which, yes, I completely agree with you in terms of your observations of Mark Texeira's work. But it also comes down to just the traditional idea of whatever light logic an artist is using, staying consistent with it. So, for instance, right now I have a light that is facing me from the front. And this is really blown out. Let me turn my ring light off. Yeah, this is a little bit better. In fact, let me go here real quick. So, something like this skull. Right now, he is being lit from this side. Light is coming from here. So, he's got a strong light source from one side. And respecting the light logic is simply the fact that you're going to draw your shadows and your darker lines on this shadow side here. And let's say that it was not just the skeleton, but his whole body. On the whole body, this side, everything on this side of the figure, the lines are going to be thicker and darker. And what gets people into trouble sometimes is when they confuse that, where even the lighting, the way that they either spot their blacks or where they put their heavier lines, if it's inconsistent, it creates artwork where the anatomy might be right, the proportion might be right, but you look at the drawing and you're like, I don't know why it's wrong. It just feels wrong. The fact that the line art is not respecting the lighting that you're establishing in the figure could be the problem. It's conflicting lighting. And I think that does happen even to professional artists sometimes when they're just busy and they're in a jam. Not in a jam, they're in a groove, they're in a flow state, and they might just be in the zone drawing. And sometimes light logic gets away from people. I mean, in the same way that sometimes you'll have a book where you'll see an artist draw a character with two left hands instead of a right and a left. Not respecting the light logic is one of those kind of things where stuff happens, things slip through the cracks. Doesn't mean that they're going to revoke your artistic license. It's something that you want to try to avoid. So let's see here. Want to move these boots down here. I'm curious, James, what made you think about Mark Texiera? Um, just if there was anything that you were looking at lately that got you on that kick, because he is an artist whose work I like. He was definitely one of my favorites when I was in high school. But he's an old school name that I haven't heard brought up in a while. So I was curious if you were just, going through some old comics, or whether he has something new coming out that you saw and you're like, "Oh, that's dope." You know. All right, let me shrink these other ones. Actually, I want to shrink all of these together. This is kind of like almost like a redo of my reference episode where I'm sitting there and I spend the whole time grabbing and pulling reference. But hey, I said I'm going to try and show you guys the unsexy parts of doing illustration. And sometimes that means gathering reference. But at least this time I know going into it that I should have reference before I start, as opposed to me starting willy-nilly. Although there is something that I said in that episode, which is that you should do your thumbnails first, then gather reference to meet the thumbnails. The difference is that, oh, I can't show you the screen. Duh. Let me go back to that. Go back to here. Anyway, the difference here is that I have a very clear thumbnail in my mind. And I'm going to really, the sketches that I'm going to do now are going to be me refining my thumbnails, or refining that mental thumbnail. So let's see here. Get a little sip of coffee. Oh, I didn't even say what up to Byron. Hey, Byron. Good to see you, man. He says, hey, people. Always pleasure to have you here. So James says, I was looking through a Wolverine book that I have. I don't know if he was influenced by Jim Lee or vice versa, but I think their styles are similar. Well, I know that they are contemporaries. They were both in comics around the same time. Mark Texiera, I think he followed Jim Lee on Punisher. He either followed Jim Lee on Punisher, or he did some fill-in issues during Jim Lee's run. But I remember that they were of kind of the same era. And along with Wolverine, Punisher was a great fit for Mark Texiera's work because it's very gritty and very energetic and very aggressive. They're contemporaries. I don't know how much I would say Mark Texiera is influenced by Jim Lee, in that when I look at Mark Texiera, it looks like Mark Texiera's work is a lot more, it's intentionally rough. It's not rough like, oh, he can't clean up a drawing. It's rough like Simon Beasley. And if you were to take sort of the Marvel Image style of artwork and combine that with the rendering of 90s Image artists, that to me is what I think that's kind of how I view Mark Texiera's work. I've never read any interviews or listened to any interviews with him, so I'd be curious to hear how he defines his work and thinks about himself. But I definitely, he was definitely one of my favorites. He also, when the Image founders left to create their own work, he had a book, an Image book called Union, which is kind of like a very gritty Superman type story. If anything, it probably was kind of a precursor to something like Supreme. but gritty, rough, aggressive, very muscular. That's sort of that's my recollection of all of his work, but I haven't looked at his work in a good long while. I'm curious, James, if you looked at any of Mark Texeira's ghostwriter work as well, because that's where I really got into his work, started digging it. Let's see here. Paul mentions, I've been learning a lot about light and color working on my latest children's story project. It's been fun. You know what? I mean, I love those images you post of it online because it is just rich and lush. And it has actually inspired me to want to start doing more where I maybe do just enough rough sketching to get the structure of whatever I want to draw down, and then switch to drawing just in shape and color. Not that I'm not respecting volume, but that the whole idea of just dropping out line art altogether and working in color and value. I think that there is a lot to learn from that, and I think that I have definitely been hesitant in the past simply because I am very dependent on line work. But the nature of creating things is it's fluid, it's a continuum. It's not just, oh, you're just one thing and you just do things one way. So while it might be taking me a while to creep towards, you know what? Let me make this a little larger. It's weird because I kind of prefer to draw really small when I'm thumbnailing, but hell, I'm working digital, I'm hanging out with you guys. Maybe I blow it up a little bit more. See, one of the things that bothered me about reference is like I saw this pose, and the challenge I have is to not duplicate this because this is pretty similar to what I imagined mentally already. And so now I'm kind of trying to fight against making it exactly what's in that photo. Which again is probably a good reason for me to go back to drawing smaller and have multiple thumbnails. In fact, let's take this for now and just throw that to the side. Let's see what happens if we have something that's a little bit more straight on. Need to adjust my chair a little bit lower. There you go. Let's see, instead of her being turned to the side, What if I've got her sort of more straight on? Let's see here. James says, I don't think I've looked at any of his Ghostwriter stuff. Talk about Mark Texiera. My first exposure to him was on Moon Knight from the mid to late 2000s. Hmm. I'm trying to remember if I read. I feel like I did read some of that Moon Knight stuff. I mean, it's funny that you bring him up because he's definitely an artist who, when I discovered him, I read a lot of his work. He had like one of the last titles from the Marvel Epic line called Terror Incorporated that he drew, and I was getting that. Um, I'm trying to remember what else there was because there were a couple of different books. He was like one of those guys who he would come on, do 4 or 6 issues, and then they would shuffle him around to other books. But I definitely followed him to a few different titles once I discovered him as a creator. Yeah, I remember him on Moon Knight. I remember him on Terror Incorporated. Definitely Ghost Rider. Definitely Wolverine. And then other than that, the main thing that I remember him from is his image book Union. Now here's an idea. Maybe have the knee cross over the front, come out, then down again. You know, I think that I may be doing some mental projecting myself because when I said that the Tom and Jerry character, the design was sort of like a Gil Elvgren drawing, which I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the pinup artist Gil Elvgren, but definitely worth looking up in terms of like, you know, drawing the sexy pinup girl. He's kind of one of the godfathers. But what I was gonna say is that in my mind, as I was picturing this, I was picturing an almost more cartoony Gil Elvgren. So it might not necessarily be that the Tom and Jerry piece is in that vein. I'm just trying to mentally put it there because that's what I'm trying to do. Sometimes my brain likes to create its own narrative for things, and I try to be aware when I'm doing that and catch myself and say, is that really what I'm saying or thinking or how it really is or was? Or am I just projecting my current thoughts, needs, desires onto what I think is my perception? Trying to keep myself honest. I'm just gonna have her in some shorts. Let's see here. James says, I have this manga style book that has basic line work for poses. The way you're drawing reminded me of that. Well, I think that is how a lot of artists begin drawings, is just simple volume and structure. Like that whole fundamental drawing idea of like the loose block in sketch to give you your major masses and your anatomy and your proportion. The fact of the matter is that drawing, you can draw in such a way that your style shows through depending on who you are. But for the most part, the under drawings, the volumetric drawings, really kind of look the same no matter who you are. Like you could look at Rembrandt, you can look at well, no, Rembrandt I think was a lot looser and sketchier, but in his under drawings. But you can look at Rembrandt, you can look at Loomis, you can look at any of your favorite comic book artists, and this phase kind of looks the same for everybody. At least that is my opinion. I was thinking about even taking I'd mentioned at the beginning of this stream that I did have another story to kind of work on while I'm still writing my next magnum opus. And I was thinking about how funny, crazy it would be to just get on here and all of a sudden it's like, boom, I'm just working on pages. I just come in, you're like, what's going on? I thought you were just sitting around doing illustrations. I thought we were reading about your new comic. And I'm like, nope, onto a new comic. I think actually what I want to try for this next comic is to draw it as a web comic, post it online to build up an audience, then run a Kickstarter campaign for a print edition. For the digital reward, make it a deluxe edition that has all of the behind the scenes, like all the thumbnails, all the pencils, the script, all the character designs, and then just make it something where it's really like maybe the reward tiers would be like digital deluxe edition, then print edition that's comic only, print edition that's comic with all the back matter. It's almost like a graphic novel, and then a hardcover of the deluxe edition, and maybe keep it to just that. But my main thing is thinking the web comic, just in the sense that from what I have heard, like I am a big fan of Tyler James' Comic Launch podcast. And the whole thing that he always keeps reminding people is that it's crowdfunding. And it's like you bring the crowd, they provide the platform for the funding, meaning that it's not like you just throw it up there and people give you money. You have to build an audience up first. And from what I have observed, web comics, if you're an unknown creator, web comics are one of the best ways to get that audience beforehand so that you can just tell people when it's time, point them at your webcomic, point them to your campaign and say, you've been reading this online, you've been enjoying it. Now's the time if you want to support and get more. So let's see here. In terms of me just getting in here with a new comic, Byron says that would be wild and great. Well, hell, maybe I need to get started. Maybe next stream will be the me working on that comic. And Paul says, what do you think of using webtoons? So that is an interesting idea because I think webtoons is a great place to build an audience But I know that the terms of service, I think they have stuff in there about wanting to have the first right of refusal if you do develop it into some kind of media property, which I am not a fan of giving them any kind of exclusivity. And in addition to that, I am still trying to figure out how, in terms of doing a web comic, I want to present the how I want to present the artwork, because I do think that having comics online is an important part of the current marketing landscape. I don't know. It's for me. I'm not necessarily thinking about the vertical scroll. I'm thinking more in terms of posting stuff on Instagram. Like Paul, I really like how you lay out your work on Instagram, where you just scroll not vertically but horizontally. You swipe through the panels, and what I was planning is to do a book where within each panel, I try to make the storytelling as dynamic as possible, but to tell the comic in classic Kirby 6 panel grids. Because that's the thing. Jack Kirby, a lot of times I would look at his pages and it's the panel structure is very simple and very gridded, but he made what was going on inside of the panel so dynamic that it felt incredibly bombastic and dramatic and took you to other worlds and other places. And I agree that one of the big strengths of comic books is the page layout, being inventive with page layouts. Like when I look at comic creators like Howard Chaykin and Walt Simonson, hold on, let me blow my nose. When I look at creators like Walt Simonson and Howard Chaykin, who are huge influences on me, one of the things that they bring to the medium is their dynamic page layouts. The page unto itself is a work of art, and the way in which it leads the eye through the narrative. That storytelling is, I would say, in some ways more important than the actual draftsmanship. And I agree with that. So I hate to use the word regressing, but simplifying or reducing a comic book to a 6 panel grid is kind of like hamstringing yourself by not using one of the most important tools in comics. But my thinking is, one, I want to not rely on tricks. And I don't think that dynamic storytelling is a trick. It's a skill, it's a craft. Or dynamic page composition, page layout, panel layout. I don't think it's a trick, but I think when you get to pages and comics that look really cluttered and you can't follow it, it's people who are trying to imitate the work of great storytellers without necessarily understanding those the underpinnings. And I feel like if I can make an incredibly compelling comic without with a very simple, 6 panel grid, or the 9 panel grid that Dave Gibbons used so effectively in Watchmen, using very simple grids, it's like that will force me to really push my storytelling within the panel. And it will also allow me to do work that will be, this comes back to the webtoons thing. I mean, getting into your question really slowly in a roundabout way, Paul. Um, I'm not concerned necessarily about webtoons, and I may post my work on webtoons, but that's not a priority. But making stuff that's in a swipeable form, a mobile-friendly format, where I'm thinking, let's say I've got vertical panels, and you can just scroll through the whole comic, or a whole comic page. You can scroll through vertically. You can swipe horizontally if it's on Instagram. To do something like that. That's sort of where my head is at, and it's going to be an experiment because I've never done that before. Intentionally tried to draw for that format. So we'll see how it works, how it ends up. Um, yeah, I'm still real vague on it. I'm vague on it because I don't know how it's going to go. But that's my plan right now is 6-panel grids, and it doesn't mean that I'm going to try and plan it so that if I do horizontal panels that go across, like let's say like I've got 3 tiers, and then the middle tier is a long shot, or the top tier is an establishing shot. I'll try to design it so that you can take that long panel, and if you were to be scrolling or vertically or flipping across, if you were to slice that in half and just have the first half and then the second half stacked or swiped, it would read logically. Like it's almost as if I could just drop a gutter in the middle of that. Or I may do it where it's like that and I'll have a gutter, but the image still continues. So I haven't worked out completely how I'm going to execute it. It's going to be an experiment. James says, so it wouldn't matter if you were drawing a character, if you're drawing a character with a muscular physique or a plump one. I guess in terms of the manga styling, you know what? To a certain degree, I don't think it would, because I remember having a conversation with Carl Ganas, the drawing instructor that I've studied with a number of years. I remember there was a pose we were doing where the model was a very, very muscular guy. He's somebody who I had drawn many times before, but he was incredibly muscular. And I was trying to ask, and I asked Carl about, you know, getting the gesture and the sense of character and story when it appeared to me, just by looking at his physicality, that so much of the story was in how built, how yoked this guy was. And he sat down at my drawing board and drew the model, and he drew him in such a way that he was really focused on the gesture and what the person was doing, and he was still muscular and he still felt like the model, but he didn't draw him as muscular as I made him. And what I realized is, let's just say let's just stick with the pose that I drew here. But let's say that it is really simple. Let me break this down into here. I'm going to need a new layer. If you were to draw a stick figure, so a very simple stick figure, and you haven't even added any volumes yet. Now, let's say that within this, I go in and still thinking more two-dimensionally than three-dimensionally, but I'm just sort of like, okay, I give thickness to the legs. Give thickness to the arms. And I give thickness now to the hands and the neck. Now, before going in here and like turning these into actual, cylinders, that would be the next step for me, is to actually, make these into volumes that move into space. But before doing that, you can take something that at this stage, you can take this exact same figure and say, all right, I am going to intentionally make them very muscular. You would maybe, let's say, broaden the shoulders out. maybe here, take the forearm instead of having it just go from elbow to wrist, maybe instead you really compress this muscle. So you just go out a little bit more to really make that forearm kind of Popeye, kind of. And then when you get to the shoulder, have the deltoid really bump up. And also maybe on the other side, have that well, no, because of this side, I was gonna say to maybe bump out the tricep, but this is where anatomy knowledge actually comes in handy because you might say, well, if they are like that, it's the bicep that's pulling. The tricep is going to be relaxed in this pose because the bicep is the one that's compressing here. And maybe I would do something where like let's make the neck angle it in more, make it a little thicker. And then let's say make a strong cut and the lower abs as if they've got some really strong definition there. And again, wherever there's a bend in the joints, a bend in the joints is a really good place to make muscles flare, because they're moving around, they're changing direction. The whole limb is changing direction. And the joints, that is your job as an artist when you're drawing the joints is to describe how a form is changing direction. I'm going to put the wrist behind resting on the hip just because it feels like it belongs there. And again, this pose has that same compression that's going on with the forearm in that pose as well. Now instead of having the deltoid compress, you can have the deltoid kind of round out. Let's beef up those pecs. So on and so forth. I could keep going on and on, but instead I'm going to switch and draw the same thing again now, but drawing a skinny version. But I think, James, you can see where I'm going with this in the sense that you can use this same architecture for any figure, and then once you have that drawn, you either draw on top of it, adding, or you can cut away. Because I'm still using this kind of, this simple stick figure architecture, but if I want them to be skinny, maybe I really emphasize the waist narrowing. So maybe in the middle here, I really cut in and try to intentionally elongate that torso and elongate the rib cage a bit. And in this case, in the way that I was bulking up the joints or bulking up the muscles where they bend, it's almost like I lean into trying to make this as thin as possible and making it so that you'd be able to see the muscles on someone who's very thin, even if they aren't particularly muscular, but really trying to almost not destroy the silhouette of the gesture. Like the gesture start to take over more. Like they're just a gesture that has a bit more volume to it. You're really keeping them as lean as possible. So these are the places where being able to decide what you want and then figure out how to get the figure to do or to conform to what you're trying to express. That's really the challenge there. So yeah, that is a very long-winded answer. And now that I'm almost done with this little sketch here, I'm gonna go back and take a look at what's going on in the chat because I see you guys have been talking and chatting while I've had my head down, buried in stick figures. But no, it really, for me, it really does all begin at that gesture. And like you had mentioned, like looking at that manga book, that the way I was drawing and starting out a drawing really seemed the same. I mean, there are definitely artists that just start out with a scribble and they find the drawing in the scribble. And I am not against that method. It just isn't how my brain works. And we all need to figure out what works for us mentally, cognitively, in terms of our way of approaching picture making. So let's see here. So I'm way back in the comments here. Byron mentions Webtoons has pretty terrible terms and hosting conditions. Basically, you can't have anything with blood or too violent or risque. All right, see, that was something that I was thinking about but didn't say. Not like I was hiding it, but I didn't get it out. I lost that thread. My stuff tends to be violent. My stuff tends to be not overly sexualized, but definitely, I prefer having. I like the European comics model. Um, they're not shy about human sexuality. Not everything has to be like an adult comic, but nudity is not something where it's like, oh my God, this is horrible. The world's gonna burn. Protect the children. Um, I prefer, like heavy metal and European album comics, that sort of thing. So sexuality and violence in my stories, I prefer that. That's what I find entertaining. I don't have to cram it into comics like I have an agenda. It's more sort of I draw what I enjoy drawing. So yeah, that's another reason for Webtoons. Now, I will tell you that as a reader, I have a buddy, a different Carl, my friend Carl Altstetter. He had a comic on Webtoons called Mirror, and I was reading it as it was coming out on Webtoons. And I will say that the interface for the vertical scroll, if it's a good creator, it's actually I found it to be a pleasurable reading experience to read that way. Kari Randolph, he had a comic on a Webtoons, I believe, called Sirens of the City, which was about like a modern day living in New York, sirens like from the Greek mythology that had the power to control people through their voice and through song. And there were sirens and Medusas, and obviously I like Greek mythology, so all that stuff in a comic was like catnip to me. Um, but yeah, that's another one. I really enjoyed um, his Webtoons comic. Let's see here. Oh, and Byron says, as a personal thing, I really don't like the vertical scroll format. And he says, however, I'm a big fan of webcomics as a whole. I just think it's best to host it on your own if possible. Yeah, so that's the plan. I also means me developing a new website, as opposed to the current site that I have, which is mostly just my store interface, and kind of building up something new. I've got a pipeline where I can have a host for a webcomic, plus a store, plus a blog, and design my site around those three things. And then I don't know how, like, there are definitely ways to have your sites that you have Patreon integration so that patrons can go to your site and there's a patrons only sections. Right now, it makes more sense for me to just post the Patreon content on Patreon as opposed to setting it up to have it gated on my site. Some people I think, have had some great success with that. But I think that that's getting deeper into the web development area than I have the skill set for, and I don't necessarily have the budget to bring on a web developer to build a new site for me that has all those features. So for now, I think it'll probably be like posting early for patrons and then posting it in the public site. So Paul says, I've enjoyed having mine on Instagram, but didn't build an audience at all. I was thinking Webtoons might help me do that, but it doesn't seem like I'd be able to comply with the terms. Yeah, no, your boy definitely would not comply with the terms. But that's one of the things I love about it. Well, you know what? That's the tough thing is how do we get our work in front of people? There's so many people I talk to who are worried about their ideas being stolen, and I think that having your ideas stolen by a publisher or another company or another creator, I think that really is the least of your worries. The hardest part is getting people to give a shit about what you make. And a big part of that, first off, is making something that is good enough to warrant people's attention, to make something that people want to stop and look at and say, "Oh, this is cool. I would like to read this. I would like to draw, see more of this story." Um, but then, even once you do that, having it in a place where it's easily accessible, able, something that people easily accessible and easily shareable. That's the two. Um, I've considered the possibility of mirroring the comic on Substack and using Substack as a platform to distribute the work. But for the most part, when I see people on Substack, I don't see very many people that are serializing comics work on Substack. I see a lot of people. There are a lot of comic creators that have blogs on there, and I know that Substack did at one point subsidize a bunch of creators to produce work on there. I think it was like Donnie Cates and Scott Snyder. And I don't know if it was Scott Snyder, but there was a whole bunch. Who's the guy? Nick Spencer. Had that long run on Spider-Man, and I think that he got a lot of comic creators into the Substack platform. But I never went and actually read any comic creators' work on Substack, with the exception of Brian K. Vaughan reteaming with Nico Hendrickson to do. It begins with an S. I can't remember the name of it, but it's a book about people that are dead. It's about ghosts from different time periods living together, and I was reading that on there for a while, and the art was beautiful, but the pacing, I think, was just didn't quite do it for me. Now, mind you, that's the big thing about webcomics. People love to complain about them, but you're reading something for free. You ain't really got a lot of room to bitch. So I have first off, it was beautiful altogether. It's just, I think it's one of those things where in the end, it's a story that will read better in larger chunks. And that's also something that I keep in mind, because I'm not really sure how to pace mine out to try and make, like, if I'm only putting up a page a week, to make that an interesting page. Let's see here. There'll probably be more. I think this is one of the things we'll go back and forth on in terms of talking about it. But let me get into the chat a little bit more. So James goes back to talking about the line work and the basics. Yeah, I really do feel like this first sketch is the way you start, with just gesture and volume, and then on top of that, just moving things around, building them up, adjusting them to fit the volume and structure that you are trying to express. And Katie Cat, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. Hello. Let's see here. So Paul says, I've been wanting to work on full-size comic pages instead of the 5x8 I've been doing, and using 9 or 12 panel grids for 80% of the pages, only departing for dramatic effect. Well, I definitely did that in Morningstar during, especially in the latter half of the series, because I had so much that I was trying to compress into the story that it became sort of the 9-panel grid became a structural tool for me, in that I knew that every single page, not just every issue, but every page, I tried to write it such that it had a beginning, a middle, and an end. And what I would try to do is structure it such that, you know, I would break the page into 3 tiers, and tier 1 is the beginning, tier 2 is the middle, tier 3 is the end of the story for that page. And then, and frequently within a tier, I would try to have the tier have a beginning, middle, and end. So it's almost like as if you were looking at a Sunday, not a Sunday, like if you're just looking at a comic strip in your newspaper, and that comic strip had it's a 3-panel gag strip, except I'm telling supernatural western, but you've got those strips where you've got the beginning, middle, and end, just in terms of an action. You've got the anticipation of the action, the taking of the action, and the result of the action, and then move to the next tier, repeat that, move to the next tier, repeat that, and that's a comic page for me. And I found that was very useful for a dense story. But it also goes back to the conversation we were having earlier about the sacrificing story structure or sacrificing a dynamic page layout. That's what I meant to say. Sacrificing a dynamic page layout for something that has a grid and really serves just cranking through a lot of story or complicated story or dense story. And I think the best comic creators are ones who don't sacrifice anything. And I think that you can do that and have it not be a sacrifice. But when you throw what we're talking about here in terms of web comics or Instagram or hosting on your own website, or making scrollable comics of any sort, that is where you get to, all right, something does have to be sacrificed, because the dynamic page layouts that we know of and love in comics often don't translate well digitally, because some people are reading horizontally, some people are reading vertically, some people are reading on a small device, and you have to zoom in and then swipe around the page. And all of that is antithetical to reading. It becomes, you have to engage not in a pleasant way with the material. You have to actively try and figure out where to go and move around. It makes what is normally an intuitive reading process unintuitive. And you're like, well, fine, then don't do web comics, just stick with print comics. But that goes back to building an audience and making the work shareable, because not as many people go into comic shops these days. I wish that they did, but that's not necessarily how you're going to find new readers. It's not necessarily how you're going to find readers who wouldn't necessarily go pick up a superhero comic. But if you're doing an interesting crime comic or interesting fantasy comic, or you're doing like a lesbian vampire fantasy, somebody who might not go to comic shops for looking that, but may see it show up in their feed because of the types of things they already read, those people are people, I think that's kind of what you want. You want to bring people into the comics ecosystem, as opposed to trying to convert comic readers to read something that they don't want, because a lot of times the Wednesday Warriors really do just want Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, X-Men, and there is no shame in wanting what you want. They know what they want. They know what they like. Give me more of that. I don't have a right to tell someone that they have to read my comic. So, it's the challenge of figuring out how to get your work in front of the people who will already love what you want to do naturally, as opposed to trying to make something that is X-Men like or Batman like in order to get Batman or X-Men fans to try your book. Because the fact of the matter is that if it's not X-Men or Batman, they're probably not going to give a shit. Okay. End of that rant. On to the next rant. Katie says, pretty cowgirl, I see. Yes, it's going to be a cat cowgirl. kind of inspired by that Tom and Jerry character. And again, this is one of those things where we get into interesting conversations on the live stream, and I I get caught up and we're talking and I get very little work done. So who knows? Maybe I'll be working on this next week. I don't know. Um, let's see here. Paul says I've been trying to get my wife to stand like that. She's not having it. The pose. Well, I mean, my wife would definitely pose for me. I've had her. Honestly, it's not so much I should ask her to pose more often. What I tend to do is sometimes I will just catch her sitting in a certain way, or I just catch an expression in her face, and I'll just do sketches of her in my sketchbook. But she's definitely game for being a full-on model, and I don't take advantage of it as much as I should. Um, I think part of that is for as much as I go on about using reference, yeah, I think that it's can be challenging to get. I think because I don't sit there with a bunch of costumes and really, do a whole production. A lot of times when I need reference, it tends to be like more of anatomy for this pose and anatomical reference versus having a model in an environment um posed in the way that I art direct. I don't think I've really perfected that whole art directing a photo shoot workflow yet. And it is a workflow. You got to get used to it. I mean, Norman Rockwell, he's got that whole book, Norman Rockwell. Is it Life Behind the Camera? I can't remember. I did a whole YouTube video about it, but it is a great book. And he very clearly art directs his photo shoots as if you were an art director doing a photo shoot for an ad campaign, and I think that's a lot more investment and figuring out how to get what I need in order to make the image and not necessarily wasting her time getting a bunch of photos that I'm not even going to end up using. But yeah, if I just asked her to stand in that pose and let me take some photo reference or sketch her, she'd totally be down for that. Let's see here. I'm skipping through a few, just trying to get caught up here. So Katie says, sucks how I always materialize in these streams almost an hour late. Thank you, Paul. He says, you got to get that on your calendar. Well, hey, a good reminder for everybody. If you hit not just the subscribe button, but if you go and hit that notification bell, that means that you will get an alert when I go live. And I actually had a notification on my phone to remind everyone on Friday, just reminder, live stream next Sunday, but I was busy on Friday and didn't have time to post that reminder and reshare the link. So I'm trying to get better at reminding you guys of that. I mean, going back to the Artcasters, I think that's great. The fact that they have a newsletter whose whole point is to tell people, to remind them, this is when we're going live. This is whose live stream we're going to be on this week, because they rotate through the three hosts to posting it on their channels. I think it's a really smart way to do it. There's so many great marketing ideas that I see my friends doing, and it is just me not having the bandwidth to implement them, because I think I could be doing a lot better business-wise as a creative if I really did all the things that an artist could do to get their work in front of people, let them know the things that they have to sell, figuring out what their audience wants more of. All of that, those are great things to do. And Katie says, Paul, that only works if I remember to check/set a reminder. Katie says, Jeremy is locked in. Well, thank you. And Paul asks Byron, so how do you get comics fans to your own hosted webtoons? I think there will definitely be answers in there. Wow, I'm going to have to get caught up on this chat. All right, I'm going to stop drawing for a bit and just talk with you guys, because I think that's what the stream is going to be for now on. Is I draw for like the first half, and then I just talk with you till the end. So James says, yeah, the pose and architecture would be the same, going back to the rough sketch that I did before. But Paul says, I meant to say webcomic, not webtoon. And and I just have to just Paul's funny. He says, Katie Cat locked in. He is Yoda voice, which I don't do a very good Yoda voice, but I do a pretty good Wookiee. But it's kind of a one-note wonder there. Let's see here. And Katie says, we got him off track too many times. No more. Dude, you've realized this. This is what we do. We get off track here. We go into the weeds and we wander around and discover stuff and make stuff up and have random ass conversations. That's what I'm here for. That's what we're doing. So there is no track. There never was. So Byron says that's a hard question to answer because it's basically asking how do you gain online traction in social media. Now, interestingly, before I go to Byron's answer, you really can just type into YouTube how to build an online audience or how to gain online traction or how to market your work on social media. And you will find hundreds of videos. So there are answers. And some of them might just be sort of quick hit, trendy things. Some of them are things that are actual tactics that do work, but the internet changes so quickly and people are constantly trying to game the algorithm so much that the tactics that work right now may not work in 3 months, may not work in 6 months. It's constantly changing, so you have to stay up on it. And then some of those videos are just videos on traditional fundamentals of marketing and marketing 101 ideas that never change. But I myself have never, I've started paying more attention to marketing, reading books about marketing and trying to learn more about the fundamentals. But I certainly spend so much more time on the craft of art making and storytelling than I do on the business side, to my detriment, I think. Byron says, the best you can do is to build your audience via places like Twitter or what have you, then funnel people into your website, usually with promises of early release on a website and on Patreon. And Paul says, I didn't figure you were going to give me the golden key. It's just a lot of work, right? And Byron says, I wish I could tell you an easier, more direct way, but honestly, algorithm black magic. It's algorithm black magic and just grinding. To which Paul's like, grinding, yeah. I will say that one of the things I have come across in podcasts that I listen to about marketing, that getting people on your mailing list in your newsletter. And that's why I mentioned the newsletter at the beginning and ending of every stream. And I've honestly, on social media, I've cut out all of the other links and just left the link to my newsletter. And I haven't had the newsletter growth that I really want, but that's because I haven't been posting what are called lead magnets. And all a lead magnet is a piece of content that someone is definitely going to want. A wallpaper of a cool poster of a character that's like a phone wallpaper that they can download, or a free chapter of a comic, or a digital sketchbook like I give away, or a tutorial, like just a one-sheet tutorial for something that you happen to be good at. But you make that something and you tell people you have a landing page for it, like whatever you're using, and you just say, hey, you get this, sign up for my newsletter, you get this thing. And that's it. Or it's more, you make it more about, here's your free download, and you just have a thing there at the bottom where it says, in exchange for signing up, you'll be getting a monthly newsletter that you can unsubscribe from at any time. There's like GDPR legalese that you have to by law have for people so they can easily opt out, even if you're giving them a download. You're telling them you're giving them a download for free, but you're also telling them, and if you decide you do not want to hear from me anymore after you have the download, you can always just unsubscribe. But the point is that we all scroll through social media, but we tend to open our email. Even if you just see something in your inbox, you end up deleting it. The fact is that you are getting in front of more people that way than you are by just posting stuff and having it go through the constant feed on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all of that. So I've been trying to lean more into that. And that comes back to the thing I was saying about trying to serialize my comic on first on Patreon, but then secondly on Substack. And I guess if people wanted to subscribe for like the paid Substack, then it almost, I don't want to create competition between Substack and Patreon. I want to pick one place that I'm funneling people for subscriptions, and right now it's Patreon. And I'm not ready to try and upend Patreon to try and move to Substack. I really want to use it more as just a newsletter platform to get my work out. That doesn't mean I'm starting a Substack immediately. It's just another thing I'm considering. I've had this comment up on the screen for a little while because I was going to read it next. Katie says, I love my violence, gore, body horror, and other risque things in my characters. Same with me. So yeah, Webtoons is probably not going to work for me. And Paul says, in any case, my 13-year-old daughter is obsessed with Webtoons. See, and that is the audience right now. So it makes complete sense that they would be protective of the amount of violence and sexual content that's in a comic on Webtoons. They want to keep the platform PG-13 because that is their demographic. So it makes sense. Katie asks Byron, have you tried making your comics into zines? And Byron says, I've been wanting to make a zine. I just never gotten around to it or figured out how I want to distribute it. I'm curious. I mean, when I think of zines, I simply think of the difference. I think of it as making something you can photocopy at your local copy shop and staple together and just distribute them by mailing them out or selling them at zine conventions or zine fairs. To me, I don't see too much difference between that versus just doing small print runs of comics, doing stuff on print on demand where you're paying maybe, I don't know, $2 a copy for something you're selling for $5. So you're making a little bit of profit on it, but having slightly higher production values. I'm not saying people shouldn't make zines. I am really not involved in zine culture and haven't been, other than going to the Alternative Press Expo like many years ago and having bought some zines that looked really cool at conventions. But other than that, I mean, I don't really see. I'm curious from Katie, what your thoughts on how it is different to turn your comic into a zine. Like, let's say you've got a 20-page black and white comic book story. I'd be curious if you think just photocopying it and stapling it, now it's a zine, or whether you see transforming a comic into a zine as there being additional steps beyond that. Because I don't know. I'm ignorant on that topic. And Katie says to Byron, understandable. You could sell your zines to your audience. I've heard seen you've an audience the frequent. I'm not sure if I'm not reading this well. HTH to frequent your website. I'm not sure if I'm following that one. I'm butchering the content or the context of what you're trying to say there, and I apologize. And Paul says, I wish someone would try to steal my stuff. Wow, I must be really, really behind in the comment. Oh yeah, no, I'm 20 minutes behind. That was 20 minutes ago. Jesus. All right, let me really get caught up here. Katie says, true, luckily for my project, sapient bacteria. Oh, yes, I remember the story. really turns people's heads. I like to be optimistic and trust people will pay attention in the future. And Paul says, where do I find Byron and Katie Cat comics? And Byron says, good question. I've been trying to find a good place to rehost my stuff. I really need to do, but real life has been getting in the way. You know what? I would love, Byron, definitely leave me like a comment in terms of like, I want to check out your stuff too. And maybe if you are interested, we could have you on a stream sometime to talk about your work. Either if you find a good place to rehost it, or if you, whatever you have that's available online now, we could just have a conversation, maybe have you on, share some of your current work, talk about it, get it out there. So, you know, I'm always open to having the gang from the community and from the chat on the show. I mean, you know, that's what we're here for. So let's see here. Katie Cat says to Paul, I don't have any comics out at the moment, still in concept stage. This project needs a lot more time in the oven before it's released. And also says to Byron, relatable, honestly, I wish your comic and site the best of luck. See, so much love in the community, so much love in the chat. I love you guys. You guys are awesome. Paul says, gotcha. Let me know when you get it out. You have one ready-made fan here. I think that's 2 and 3 already. And Byron says, big ups, Paul. You're a real one. You got a fan of me as well for your stuff. Great work. It's awesome. Awesome. You guys are awesome. And Katie Cat says to Paul, thank you so much. I've got ready-made fans now. I'm so happy. All right. We're looking forward to that comic. Let that baking continue. Let's see here. All right. We're going to scroll past. Katie's excited about the cat cowgirl. Byron says getting caught up in the yapping is like 70% of the fun. Paul says, I don't know that comics fans want to read my stuff. Might have better luck converting mystery fans to comics. You know, well, this is an interesting thing. And this is a conversation that I had with my buddy Carl Altstetter a long time ago, was that I intentionally, so my comics are not normal comic book size. They are digest size. It is 5.5 wide by 8.5 inches tall. It's the size of a large manga, so not the paperback size. But, pardon me. But this size is also the size of what's called a trade paperback. The mass market paperbacks are the smaller brick size one. So a trade paperback, these are the size of just, you know, your average paperback literary novel that you would find in the bookstore. And even though it's very clearly an illustrated book, I just wanted to lean into, as opposed to making it look like a superhero book, I wanted it to look kind of like a supernatural horror, because that is the tone that the book has. And I think I bring that up because of Paul saying, I don't think, you know, converting comic fans isn't necessarily going to be as good as converting mystery or crime thriller fans. That's true. Your work is appealing to that audience. And again, that's the big challenge, is getting it in front of people who read mystery and thriller. But I've honestly thought about the idea of trying to make covers and move my illustration work to look more like the covers of whatever's in that genre. I've been meaning to redraw the cover for volume 2 of Morningstar, but I spent a lot of time looking at Western paperback novels and looking at covers and saying, oh, maybe I should have just more landscape and open plain and the character. And I still don't think I ever really nailed it, but I think there is something to be said for looking at prose novels and the covers of that, and then whatever genre your comic is in, trying to get your comic to feel like that genre, to basically to put out the welcome mat for non-comic readers. That if you're a non-comic reader, but you read romance novels, then maybe you want to make a comic whose cover looks kind of like a comic book version of a romance novel. You know, same thing with sci-fi, same with fantasy, crime, horror, whatever. Let's see here. Katie Cat says, I plan on being a 3D vlog VTuber, and my model will be a Siamese Wendigo cat girl. So I'll be a shapeshifter too, canonically. That's part of the premise. That is a goddamn mouthful. Go for it. Go get it. Byron says, you'd be surprised, Paul. The biggest issue with American comics is the lack of variety. There's reason so much of the American audience is entranced by manga. There's more variety. Very, very true. Although I do feel like there is more variety now than there's ever been. I mean, for us old heads who've been reading comics since the 90s, I mean, the 90s were 30 years ago. In fact, this will really blow your mind. We're talking with I haven't seen Alien Romulus yet, but I was talking with Carl Altster last night, and we were talking about the movie, and I told him that I got my wife to watch the first Alien for the first time earlier this year, or maybe last year. Point is that we just really watched it, and she enjoyed it. She didn't love it, but she liked it. She thought it was okay. But she's like, that really is not as scary as you made it out to be. And I said, well, it was a lot scarier when it originally came out. And, we've seen so many movies that have been influenced by this. But at the time, it was terrifying. It was a slow build of tension. And then I was talking with Carl and telling him that story. And I was like, wait, when did it come out? He's like, I think it was 78 or 79. And I'm like, so really, the answer to my wife is like, oh, this was a lot scarier 40 years ago. Okay, think about that. Let that sink in, guys. The first release got Alien. 40, more than 40, not 50 yet, but about 45. We can do the math if we really wanted to. We don't care. But about 45 years ago, first Alien. Now, mind you, I didn't see it in the theaters. I didn't see it till probably a decade later on video at home, because I was a scaredy cat as a little kid and didn't want to watch horror movies back then. But just let that sink in, guys. Ridley Scott, the first Alien, 45 years-ish ago. I'm an old head. Oh, dude. American Discord in the chat. Is that Shelby? Dude, thanks for popping in. I've met you a couple of times at conventions over the years. If that is Shelby, Shelby Robertson, amazing artist. I believe that's the handle that you go by. If I'm misnaming you, I apologize. But if so, good to see you. Thanks for stopping in. Badass, amazing artist. You guys should definitely check him out. Yeah, I've been having fun. Well, I was doing character designs not character designs. I just had an idea for a pinup for a sexy cowgirl cat. I don't know what made me want to do it. I think I woke up from a dream thinking about it, and I was I don't know. Sometimes stuff happens in the brain, and you just wake up with an image and you want to draw it. I have comics I should be working on. I have illustrations I should be working on, but either way, this is what I decided to do today. But yes, Paul says manga, that could be a gold mine. Well, and that's again, like I said, my books are both. I picked a format that was both that would be friendly to non-comic readers, but also would be familiar to manga readers. Each one is roughly 140-ish, 160-ish pages. Something that a manga person wouldn't feel weird picking up, someone who is a non-comics reader wouldn't feel picking up, because I love comics, but the traditional format and size, it is its own unique, awkward thing. I mean, that's one of the reasons why comic retailers are very particular about formats, because their racks are designed for monthly comics. That's the bread and butter, keeping those comics coming in and out of the store every week, getting the weekly buyers to come in and keep that flow. And, when a book comes out that's in a weird format, they're like, a lot of times they're like, I don't even know if I want to carry this or order it, because it's going to be a pain in the ass to shelve and display. And I think a lot of stores are definitely work to try and make unique formats display well in their store because they want to see the medium grow and experiment, do different things. But at the end of the day, the retailers, they got to make their monthly nut, and the margins on those. My empathy is with the comics retailer because that shit looks so hard. It's like the comics equivalent of the bear. All right, again, I went off the thread. Byron says manga and Eastern along with the indie scene art are my main inspirations and for my art and how I draw. And Paul says chat versus Jeremy drawing today. The chat wins the battle. Y'all are gonna win the battle every week because there's more of you than there are me. You've got me ganged up on. And American Discord says that tuxedo cat looks exactly like my cat. Well, this was what I was going for when I was sketching the idea out. I just sort of this cat. We have two cats in our house, and our cats are gray. They kind of have the patterns of tuxedos, but not exactly. And I ended up not wanting to grab photos of them. I said this kind of at the beginning of the stream that for some reason making a sexy cowgirl, I don't know why I felt weird about using my cats and making them sexy, but I feel weird about it. Let's see here. All right. Let's try and get mostly caught up here. Katie Cat says, I found the word to describe how I'm going to try and design my zombies. Biopunk. Okay, see, right there. That's a creator. You got the cool taglines, the cool names for them. Let's see here. Byron says, multitasking is hard. You know what? Multitasking is hard. Life is hard. Anything worth doing is hard. That's just how shit goes. Kitty Cat says, I meant to say, I saw you have an audience who seek out your website. And Byron says, me on a stream? I'm not going to lie. That's really tempting. Guess I'll get my button gear and try to find some hosting as soon as possible. Well, dude, you have a standing invitation. And when well, Paul will tell you, I'll put out the invitation and then I'll follow up on it a year later. But so that just means the sooner you get the website up, the better. But no, there's a lot of friends that I've made over the years, both in person and friends that I've made just digitally through the virtual space. I keep saying, oh, I need to have you on for a conversation. I need to have you on for a talk. I need to have you on just to catch up. And, the day gets, the week goes by, the month goes by, and it just takes time to follow up. And then there's days when, like this, there's another friend that I was thinking about hitting up about being on the show, but I said, you know what? I kind of want to just sit and draw today, which now we're spending more time talking, all of us. But rarely, whenever I have a guest on, do I get much drawing done at all. It really is just us conversing in public. So I was just like, all right. I try to just always let my friends know I'm happy to have them on. And then whenever there's a time, there was a point where I said once a month I was going to have a guest. Just keep it at that so it's consistent. I haven't been good at that. I haven't stayed on with that, but maybe going forward we'll just try to have people on more often just to hang out, talk, whether it's one of you guys from the chat, whether it's some buddies of mine that I haven't had on before, whether it's somebody that I meet and get to know. Maybe it's like, oh, they've got a new comic coming out or a Kickstarter. We want to get the word out. That sort of thing. So we will see. Nothing set in stone. So Katie says, one of the main points of zines is control. Technology is very advanced. You can purchase photo scanners and printers that print at a very high quality, so quality is no longer an issue. Katie says, censorship is another to choose zines. Since you're printing in-house, you don't have to worry about print on demand, places denying you, can even be cheaper in the long run. Some print on demands can also be considered zines. So yeah, I guess it's really just a matter of, like you said, control. If you were to invest in a laser printer, that's basically like having a photocopier at home. So you could just print off your own books and then staple them together and boom, there you've got it. And Byron says, "Oh yeah, there's definitely more variety in the American scene now, more than ever, and only getting better. This is the best time to strike. You hear that, everybody? Now is the time to strike. Load up, bring your torches and pitchforks, and cover them in India ink." Um, Katie says zines are great for smaller, shorter comics. That would be too expensive to print on demand in cases. In some cases, so printing in house can make more sense. And I should also clarify for you guys, most of my comics tend to be black and white with color covers, and that is an intentional decision to make print on demand more affordable for me. So I a lot of times, like, if you guys are talking about wanting to do color stuff, or with a zine, you can say, all right, I'm going to make my book black and white, but I'm going to print it on colored cardstock or colored paper stock so that you're getting color that way. And those are things that I can see as a huge benefit of working on zines just through that. Byron says, "You're in your furry phase, Jeremy. Most teenagers go through one." No shit. I've considered creating. Well, I mean, I've created a separate Instagram account, and it's not that I am ashamed of doing furry art or all ages art, or no furry art or doing not safe for work art. It is more that even though my comics do tend to have sex and violence, they're sort of like they're PG-13, PG-16. They're not hard R. I want to create a place that I can produce work, including furry and not for safe art, not safe for work art, and not have the two audiences interact. I want to make it so that there's my normal stuff and then my stuff that is squarely adult, like Milo Manara type work. And I haven't done much work on that because I have barely have time to do the stuff I'm doing for you guys here online. And that stuff I can't have on the on the stream, obviously. But yes, I guess this is my furry phase evolving to the surface and kind of spilling over into the usual stream. Katie says, my furry phase has been lifelong at this point. It's like, all right, some people, you're right. It's not a phase, it's a lifestyle. I think there's a good t-shirt in that somewhere. It says Bazinga. All right, we're degenerating into the comedy. And Paul says, Byron, don't wait for Jeremy. Let him know when you're ready. Yes, definitely. Don't wait for me. When you get your shit up, you holler and we'll do it. I definitely, because literally, Paul, every time I had seen you in the chat over like the past several months, I was saying, I gotta get Paul on. Like mentally, I was saying, I need to clear the decks and we need to do it. Honestly, like you guys know the move that my wife and I had earlier this year, that threw my whole schedule into a loop. I'm still finding a new workflow, changing from a day job to being a freelancer. It's all been like my life has been nuts over the past this year has been a year of nuts, and I still try to get that new comic going. So it's all just struggling to get through the day. Katie says, sorry if I have dookie grammar. I have fat fingered autocorrect. I keep fat fingering the autocorrect bar. That hey, autocorrect be messing us up. And Byron says, aye, boss. Martin says, hey, late again. All right, this time, see, and I do feel bad when you catch it late, Martin, because I always do love to see you and have you in hanging out. Oh, let's see here. All right. So at that note, I am going to pack it in now because these are getting almost to like Patreon live stream length, which is a good transition into telling you guys that again, hit that subscribe button if you're watching, because there are people that are just lurking and just watching that aren't subscribers. Hit that subscribe button if you're not subscribed. But if you would like to get Patreon exclusive live streams, bonus live streams, we do like twice a month. We're going to have one tomorrow night. 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So 8 in the evening, Pacific Standard Time. Your times will adjust to wherever you are in the world. but we do 2.5, sometimes 3 hour long live streams where we do a deep dive to some of the best art books around. They're basically I call it artist office hours. Also, art book study group. But it's a session where we've got a Discord server open with a voice channel open. So as opposed to just typing in the chat, you actually get on there and we can just talk like human beings, just converse, discuss in real time while drawing. I call them office hours because I'll do drawovers of work that people will post in the Discord server. I try to answer art questions, do little mini tutorials. And if no one's on there, I just go through art books that I've been studying from and show my process for how I continue to self-educate, not just through experimentation, but through all of the great art books that have been written out there that share knowledge for us to learn from. I've been doing a long-running series on Walt Reed's The Figure, going through page by page, drawing, doing studies from that. There's higher tiers for higher rewards, but $2 a month is the basic tier to get you in the door. So head on over to patreon.com/Jeremy. It's patreon.com/GERIMI. If you'd like to get a free digital sketchbook, work in progress animated gifts delivered right to your inbox, blog posts about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what's inspiring me creatively, you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you'd like to purchase physical copies of my comic books, like my first graphic novel, Eye of the Gods, it is a standalone psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. My first book, I'm the writer, the artist, the letterer, the gray toner. I did everything but run through the printing press. Or if you'd like to pick up a copy of my most recent project, Morning Star, it's a retelling of Lucifer's Fall from Heaven as a Western. It's an 8-issue series. Volume 1 contains issues 1 through 4. Volume 2 contains issues 5 through 8. Both have extensive back matter. There's character designs, script excerpts, thumbnails, page layouts. I even have examples of photo reference in here. So I basically show you how I put the entire book together. And if you want to see what's inside the book before picking it up, go to my YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube, type in GERIMI. It'll take you there. Scroll down the homepage to the flip through tab. And you'll see there's book flip throughs for each of these. You can see what's inside before picking them up. So all of those things available for you guys to peruse and enjoy. And on that note, guys, great to see you as always. Hopefully I'll see some of you at the artist office hours tomorrow on Patreon. Thank you so much. Always fun to hang out with you guys. Always fun to chat, catch up. That's it for now. Go be creative.